Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And here is what we're going to try to do today. Going to need your help with this. So, obviously, it's a big game on Saturday, and when Georgia plays a big football game, tension sometimes running high. We're going to try to stay nice and relaxed and happy here today, because I do think there's a necessary reframe that needs to occur when it comes to this particular game on Saturday. That Georgia actually has a lot going for it, a lot that it can accomplish. And if anybody ought to be white-knuckled and tense and worried, it ought to be on the other side. Now, the Tennessee fans are the sort of types that wouldn't necessarily know how they'd feel if they skipped breakfast. So they don't necessarily, have any kind of anticipation of that sort of thing. They don't have a conceptualization of the future. But if they did, they would be nervous about this game. So in this particular case, we're going to reframe this in an appropriate way so that everybody understands, hey, you know what? Maybe everything's fine. At least it can be. And Georgia's got a chance to accomplish a lot here on Saturday. So it is a great vibe for the show today. Leading into that, you will set the tone with your comments here on our show before the show. We'll find out what's on your mind. I will tell you we got to be short with our R.S. Andrews cool down today, which honestly we've had very, very long ones now pretty regularly. Today it's got to be short because I got some high school work I've got to do. Matt Rugavina says, I know we're all somewhat concerned about the game this Saturday, but imagine if Kirby goes in and beats them again there in their spot, the Vol Nation reaction will be deafening. And yeah, Matt is in a roundabout way centering in on what I think the talking point for today ought to be, which is if there is pressure on this game, it's on the other side, not here. Now, that has not been the prevailing vibe around DawgNation because Georgia fans are asking some pointed questions about their team and maybe not unfairly. All of that given, if there is discernible pressure in this game, it should be on them, not on this side. I think that Matt is right. Cody BMWMC says, listen, I hope that's true. He says, but because of the offensive line injuries, I'm stressing out. And I get it. And we're going to do a big thing on the offensive line today. That we're going to get into some hardcore stuff. Offensive line will be that. As I said some yesterday, I don't think every one of these, will he play or he won't they, I don't think all of these break in your direction. Some of the guys that you're hoping to see, you probably don't. I think that's the case. Randy Hall asking about the possibility of more commits for the class of 2026. I know they recently extended, another offer to an offensive lineman. It seems like that's where they're doing work. I think right now some of this stuff, whether it be Corey Howard in Alabama or Justice Fitzpatrick in all the places that he's rumored to, I think some of this also comes down to, can you just hold on to the guys you have, which is not as much of a fun story, but that probably is the prevailing recruiting story for Georgia right now. Brian Whitehead says, looking at the stats, Vols have not gotten a sack on Georgia in the last 3 seasons. That has to continue. I would say that's probably true. Randy Hall wondering if we really will do the Golden Spittoon. Yeah, there's more talk of that coming today, Randy, for sure. What else? Bill Camacho checking in. Good to see him. SEM Dog says time to get after those Vols. You better believe that's the case. Our buddy Will Dickerson says it's time to be alpha dogs. And on Saturday, you need some alpha dogs, the likes of which there's raised up right there in Will's hometown of Trenton, Georgia. So we are ready to do all of that. In fact, let's tell you about today's show as we fire up that animation. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Microphone may be a touch loud. I'll let the folks back on the other side of the wall judge that. Assuming it's fine, then we're all ready to go. But either way, glad to have you here. DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. 2 gigantic guests today. Davin Bellamy later on. Davin's a good one to have on because we are going to get into what Tennessee wants to do with you offensively, spreading you out wide, forcing those one-on-one situations, how you handle that. That's going to be a big issue for Georgia on Saturday. Davin has played in games like this, certainly knows the challenge that defenses face in games like this. He'll give us expert opinion on that coming up. Also, massive concern as it relates to the Georgia offensive line. Mike Griffith will give us the report from Athens about who's healthy, who might play, who might not, where all of that stands. We'll do that with him here today. And off the top, do you know what a reframe is? Sometimes we have a tendency to look at things one way, but there are other vantage points from which most situations can be viewed. Today, we're going to look at the Georgia-Tennessee game from a slightly different angle. That when you kind of pay attention to this around DawgNation as of late, seems like there's a lot of angst on the part of UGA fans going into the game, not without good reason, perhaps, by the way. And yet, if there's any real pressure on this game, in this game on Saturday, I think that pressure actually belongs on the other side. We'll tell you why here coming up off the top of the program today, and we're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So here is my solemn vow on today's show. We are, as a way of, I hope, conjuring up the right energy for Saturday, going to keep it pretty light today. We're going to keep it positive. There is some of the stuff I want to get into late in the show with Davin Bellamy about one thing related to Gunner Stockton, but for the most part, we have done Stockton now for 2 days. And hot topics, you got to hit them. We play the hits. We're obviously serving what the audience wants. And yet, you also got to be careful that you don't ring the same bell too many times. So for the most part today, we're going to look at some of the other things going on in this game on Saturday. And if you really want more of the same old when it comes to Gunner, we've done a lot of that the last 2 days. I would invite you to check that out. I think, though, there is more to be said about this game, and the feeling that I get, and maybe I'm wrong, but boy, one of the things that seems like I do pretty well is pay attention to how DawgNation, I mean the fan base overall, how it feels going to a big game like this. I get the sense there's some nervousness. I do. I get the sense there's a little bit of a wait and see, and I'm not quite so sure. And some of this probably goes beyond just the thing that I think we mentioned on Monday, where how many times has it been that Georgia fans found themselves in the position, some of them anyway, some of them relishing this, some of them reluctant, but either way, a good number of Georgia fans in the position of being a naysayer going into the big game of, because Georgia played bad against a team we think is bad, therefore it can't play well against a team we suspect might be good. Feels like that's a very common storyline. We have revisited that a lot over the years. And some of that is present right now too. But I would also say over the last 48 hours, some of the chatter around Georgia and Tennessee is just a little bit different than that. There are a lot of Georgia fans who desperately want their team to win, and they're not looking to stir up trouble online or be a troll or, get attention for themselves by angering those around them. They legitimately want to be happy. They legitimately want Georgia to win. They're just not sure Georgia's going to. Have you noticed some of that? Maybe you are one of those Georgia fans. And if you do feel that way, as I said before, I don't necessarily think that you're wrong to feel that way. And sometimes, by the way, bravado of my team's about to do this and my team's about to do that, that ends up being false and phony anyway. I think it's really hard. This is a quick aside that we'll get back to the main topic. I think it's really hard to be confident in somebody else. That's meaningless to me. Confident in your team. I mean, being confident in something that you actually have very little in the way of control over just seems like a waste of time. You can be confident in yourself. You can be confident in something you yourself might be able to do, but super confident in something else. I don't know that bravado is all that valuable when it's all said and done, but maybe your experience has been different. Either way, though, if it is true in some respect what I'm saying, little anxiousness, a little nervousness, some butterflies in the stomach. I've been saying this for weeks. I've got butterflies in my stomach about this game on Saturday. What if we give a really necessary and valuable reframe to all of this right now. That actually, maybe from one vantage point, Georgia doesn't have nearly as much to be nervous about as maybe the other side probably should. After all, we think of Georgia-Tennessee, at least to a degree, as a rivalry. Not as big a rivalry as Georgia-Florida, not as big a rivalry as Georgia-Auburn within the SEC, but this is one of Georgia's rivalries. And we should also make note here, and this will be one of those things we end up talking about more in the future than we are right now, but we should make note that at least on a yearly basis, there is a very good chance this rivalry comes to an end at the end of this year. And in a roundabout way, I think something would be lost if that is true. After all, some of the most memorable moments for Georgia have happened against Tennessee. We are in a day and age in which it seems like professional sports leagues are leaning more into the geographic proximity of the teams and their divisions and who plays whom. Major League Baseball may reorganize its entire sport based around geography. College football seems to be getting away from that, even within the SEC. Two schools relatively close may play each other less frequently in future years, but nonetheless, if it is a rivalry that's about to come to a conclusion, at least on a yearly basis, think about how much Georgia has to gain if it could win this thing one more time. If it could go out one more time on top in this rivalry. Imagine how frustrated Tennessee fans would be if in their own stadium once again, as loud and, obnoxious as they want to be, if Georgia seems as unbothered by that as it has been in 2023 and 2021 and 2019 and 2017. What if that's true one more time all over again? How special would that be? Well, yesterday, Kirby Smart talked about the nature of this rivalry, the fact that for Georgia, it feels like a lot of what he calls, and we have called in the past, the college football border war type thing. Georgia has a lot of these, but when it comes to big memories for Georgia fans, the Tennessee game has held a lot of those moments in the past. This is what Kirby Smart said about that yesterday.
There's so many rivalries because of our state. It's an area in Georgia geographically that it's obviously the most important primary opponent we play. And you talk to somebody in South Georgia or West Georgia, it might not feel the same way, but they all have their passion and energy. It's a historic rivalry because it's been so many years played over time, and it's a lot of big games. During Coach Rick's era, Coach Donna's era. Been a lot of big games played between Tennessee and Georgia, so not a lot more I can say than that. All those border wars are big time rivalries.
So here's what I think that Georgia has a chance to do that very rarely happens in college sports, maybe sports in general. For the most part, the rivalries we think of when we think of rivalries are what might sometimes be described as an infinite game. It's a competition that never ends, and one side's always trying to get retribution against the other, and on it goes. But if it is true, and it certainly seems like it is, that Georgia and Tennessee are now about to stop playing on an annual basis. They'll still play on a rotational basis, just no longer on an annual basis. Y'all, Georgia, by winning on Saturday, especially if it were to win the way that it has in the recent past, in a roundabout way, you could say that Georgia's not just won the game, but it's actually won the rivalry. That this would be, in many ways, if you watch TV, you know what a series finale is? This would be the series finale of this game being played on a yearly basis. And what a way to go out if Georgia goes out on top once again. In fact, let me give you a stat that proves the point. And maybe this is not as interesting to you as it is to me, but I find it very interesting. So the folks over at CBS Sports wrote a story about the upcoming game between Georgia and Tennessee. Honest truth is I didn't really know the writer. I thought the story was really good. It may be one of those things we revisit a couple times before the week is done because it's frankly the kind of thing it feels like you see not nearly as enough of on the internet right now, of just a good story with some facts about a big game. It feels like just basic sports writing. I don't know, for whatever reason, there's not as much of that anymore. But it was, I thought, a pretty good story. And in the story, there was a pretty interesting fact. What the writer of the story, Austin Nivison, lets us know is is that the Bulldogs have won 8 straight over Tennessee. And this weekend, Georgia could become only the second SEC team ever. Now, listen to this. I think this is amazing. I hope you do too. That this Saturday, Georgia could become only the second SEC team ever to win 9 consecutive games by at least 14 points against one opponent. He says the last to do it was Florida against South Carolina back in the 1990s. Now, if you were alive in the 1990s, think about what Florida was. Steve Spurrier winning a national championship, dominating most of the teams that play. Think about what South Carolina was. So what Florida used to do to South Carolina, for those of you who were alive to experience that, that is what Georgia has been doing to Tennessee over the course of the last 8 seasons. Tennessee that would think of itself as a blue blood type program, upper crust in the SEC, but Georgia has been treating them the way that Florida used to treat South Carolina. And if Georgia could do that again, winning the game by at least 14 points, it would, in its own way, make history for Georgia. Now, you would say, and you'd be right to say this, well, BA, I'd love to win by 14-plus points again. I actually, for Saturday, just want to win the game. And I get that. That's totally fine. I just think it's important to contextualize the level of historic feat it would be if this Georgia winning streak can continue against Tennessee again. And I think we're all on the same page with that. But what ends up happening is, because, and it's funny, Kirby in the clip we played a moment ago said, well, Georgia's got a lot of border wars, and depending on where you live, and this is something that Smart's talked about a lot, and this is, I do believe, it demonstrates the deep knowledge that Kirby has of what it's like to be a Georgia alumnus or fan living in Georgia's, geographically speaking, pretty big state, touches a lot of other states. Those states care about college football. So where you live oftentimes determines which rivalry that matters to you the most. Here is the one thing I've noticed, though, about the Georgia fans who view the Tennessee rivalry as incredibly significant. And perhaps you know this too. And many of you, I'm talking about you when I say this. I think you'll agree, yeah, that kind of is true. And I'm not in any way being negative, or critical, I'm just pointing it out. I feel like the Georgia fans that hate Tennessee. It's not as large a number. In other words, ask a Georgia fan, who's your most hated rival? Florida's going to get the most votes. Auburn probably gets the second. Tennessee comes somewhere after that. So if you just measure the number of Georgia fans who hate Tennessee, it's not as large a number as the other Georgia rivals. But if there was a way to measure intensity, if instead of a box that you checked, if it was a dial that you turned, the Georgia fans who hate Tennessee, I mean they hate Tennessee. And that's one of the things that makes the game feel so significant on Saturday. The fact that Georgia has such a long winning streak, the fact that winning streak has included so many dominant performances, what it ends up being is the Georgia fans who have enjoyed this so much are now, in our chat the last couple of days, the online crowd the last few days, evidence of this, Georgia fans are so white-knuckled because they don't want this to come to an end. And it ends up feeling like a pressure situation of you're under pressure to keep on dominating Tennessee the way that you always have. But here's where the reframe comes in. The actual truth is it's not Georgia that's under pressure in this game, at least to the same degree. In actuality, it should be Tennessee who's facing all the pressure. The screenshot that we showed a moment ago of the CBS story, can we see that again? Because I want to reference the headline. The CBS writer says, can Josh Heupel solve his Kirby Smart problem? You see, that in many ways, ought to be viewed as the national storyline for this game. Heupel has had success against Florida, although some of those games closer than they were supposed to be. He's beaten Alabama twice, which is a big deal. But boy, cannot figure anything out against Georgia. That's the story in the game. The pressure is on Tennessee. Georgia's the team on the road. Georgia's the team that could still shake this off, come back home. Now, we don't want this to be true, but it could shake off the road loss, come back home, put the wins together that still get Georgia in the college football playoff. But if Tennessee can't use its home field advantage to beat Georgia, doesn't it seem like even though they're a point spread underdog, they're giving more away than Georgia would be giving away if it were to lose this game in this particular moment? The pressure, more of it on Tennessee, I would believe, than on Georgia. Now, if you talk to Tennessee or if you listen to Tennessee fans, they don't seem to know this, but they also don't seem to have much of a conceptualization about the future as it is. Their credit scores would demonstrate that they don't know that the pressure is on them because they don't know how they're going to feel 3 days from now. That's just, they don't have a vision of the future necessarily. But we know that for Josh Heupel, if he were to lose this game again, and especially to go back to the stat, if it's another game where Georgia gets a comfortable win, then all of a sudden there's a level of questioning around Heupel that is not the same thing that Kirby Smart would be facing no matter what happens that causes Georgia to lose the game, even if it's the familiar refrain that we've been talking about for the last couple of days. And for what it's worth, Kirby Smart at least alluded to this a little bit when he met with reporters last night on the notion that no matter how big blowhards like me make the game, it's still just one game in a long season in a sport now where almost everybody certainly is likely to lose eventually. This is Kirby Smart from last night.
Yeah, just live in the moment. I don't get ahead of myself. There's going to be big games after this one. I mean, there was last year. Welcome to the SEC, where it seems like every team's ranked and every team's got a ranked opponent every week. I mean, it's just a physical gauntlet, and there are no easy pathways. So I don't get too caught up in one game. I try to look at it like every game's a big game, and we'll get ready for the next one when the next one's up.
So as I conclude this topic, let me acknowledge one thing, that for the most part, all of these words are essentially shouting into the void, because no matter what happens on Saturday, for the following couple of weeks until Georgia can go play a game again, it's going to be treated as the biggest thing in the world, that humans are not logic-based creatures, they are emotion-based creatures. And if Tennessee were to beat Georgia on Saturday, it is going to conjure a lot of emotions up. I don't deny that. But the path to the playoff for everybody right now, including last year's national champion who lost twice in the regular season, the path to the playoff for everybody right now is likely to include at least one loss, maybe even two. That is just a realistic possibility. So in that world, if you've got the game at home, I don't care what the point spread says, the onus is on you to win it in a way that does not exist on the road team, especially when the team that you're playing is the team that has proven to be kryptonite for you. They're just tougher mentally and physically than you've been. I'm talking about Georgia in comparison to Tennessee. And Josh Heupel has that challenge staring him in the face, because he wasn't hired at Tennessee just to go to a bowl or just to make them better than they were under Jeremy Pruitt or Derek Dooley or Butch Jones or whoever else they've been dragging through there. He was actually hired to make Tennessee be what Tennessee fans think it's supposed to be, which means you've got to win games like this, something that Josh Heupel has not done. So does it feel like a pressure-packed week for Georgia fans? You better believe it does. Logically, should there be more pressure on Tennessee? I believe that there should. Maybe that's a reframe that can be valuable, that Tennessee fans don't seem to know this because what they don't know would fit in the Grand Canyon barely, but there is more pressure on them than on Georgia. And yet Georgia fans still want to win this game really, really bad. And we're going to keep the conversation going about exactly how Georgia can do that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad you're with us. Live video, 10 a.m., on demand after that, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast wherever you find them, world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Really, really happy to have you in the program today. Now, you want to talk about every now and then, is it serendipity? Am I using this word correctly? Every now and then things just line up for you. So the entire time I've been doing the show, quick story, then we'll get on with it. there has been a very small bug about the size of a gnat flying around the studio. It has landed near my face several times. As I'm introducing the show, it landed on the desk just so, and perhaps you just heard the thump a moment ago. I got it. I killed it because it came into my space where I belong. It was, in this case, an intruder, and it got what intruders get. It is no longer with us. And when it comes to your own home, you feel the same way. And this is where the serendipity comes in, because it gives me a chance, easy segue to talk about my friends at Breda Pest Management. Bugs, critters, those sorts of things that intrude upon your home. Listen, they have a home, they have a natural habitat, but it's not your property. You want them out of your home, and that's what Breda Pest Management is all about. That's why they spray outside and inside your home. In fact, I saw this other day. One of the great folks from Breda came over to my house. He's like, BA, can we come inside here? Because we want to make sure these bugs don't get inside the house. I watched him go upstairs, downstairs, all the way around, east wing, west wing. I'm just kidding. But he's going all over the house spraying to make sure these bugs are not getting inside, because I don't want to be bothered by bugs. I don't want that. I don't want termites eating my wood and tearing up my house. Breda Pest Management protects you on that too. And when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management, not only do you get the same level of service that I get, but you're also going to get more money put back in your pocket just for making the decision. Our folks at Breda Pest Management, they love sports fans. They're big supporters of us on high school sports on Friday nights. They love Georgia fans. Matt's a big Georgia fan, big Braves fan, just a great guy in the local community, a big part of everything that's going on, and taking great pride now for multiple generations, a company that's been in business since 1975, serving people just like you. So make the switch today to Breda Pest Management. It's online, BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com. That's who you trust today. Glad to have him as a part of DawgNation Daily. Okay, glad to have all of you with us here too. So kind of laying the land, setting the scene to begin the show today. If there's pressure, we think it's more on Tennessee than Georgia, but that doesn't mean that Georgia isn't facing some big questions. How it wins this on Saturday. One of those questions is the Tennessee defense. Maybe, I should say Tennessee offense, Tennessee offense maybe getting back to being a bit more like what it was in 2022. I think their receivers this year better than they were a year ago. I like Mike Matthews a lot, for instance. If you're a defensive player, knowing that Tennessee wants to stress you by putting you in one-on-one situations as much as it can, creating wide lanes to then run the ball through, how do you handle that? No better person to ask that to than Davin Bellamy. We'll do that today before the show is done. Also, Georgia is desperately trying to get healthier on the offensive line. Who's playing, who's not, what to expect from that group up front. We'll talk to Mike Griffith about that coming up in just a minute. But to set the stage for that, let's go around the doghouse today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, to get you ready for that. Look, the offensive line, and I would say rightly so, has been in the spotlight in a very big way for Georgia heading into this game. They've played a ton of guys, some of that by injury, some of that just because that's what Georgia wants to do. But we haven't seen maybe the five for Georgia yet. Don't know we will this week. And we don't really know of the five that will play, how are they going to play? Because unfortunately, struggles with the offensive line, that's been a multi-year story for Georgia. We'd have to say our guy John Stinchcomb doing a great job of chronicling that the last couple of weeks, really pointed remarks. Based on I can tell, based on your feedback, best I can tell, based on your feedback, you have enjoyed what John has had to say, at least in terms of the analysis. So what about this week? How is it looking for Georgia getting its offensive line ready to play for Saturday? This is also what Kirby Smart said last night about that.
Yeah, being physical. I mean, they've got a physical defensive line that comes off, hits you. We've been physical at practice. I think it's important. I don't think you can say, all right, well, let's go out here and rest up and take it easy for the game. I mean, if you want to have physicality, you got to reflect it. It would be unjust for me to not have them be as physical as they need to be at times during the week to put them out there in a situation that's going to be extremely physical. And you got to have enough left in the tank, but you got to test the tank and make sure that you're callous and tough and physical.
I think unjust is an interesting word for Kirby Smart to use there. In other words, it'd be an injustice for me to put you in a game on Saturday that you haven't been preparing for by being as physical during practice as you need to be during the game. The flip side of that is it is a banged up Georgia offensive line, and that runs the risk of guys who are already, even early in the season, seeing some and showing some wear and tear. They may be even more banged up when you get into Saturday, but you can't play it if you don't practice it. And it seems like Kirby Smart says we're still committed to being physical, despite the fact we got to have 5 healthy guys that can go out and play. And this is one of those points that we're going to keep circling back to over and over again as we get ready for Saturday's game. Because Tennessee wants to play fast, because they want to spread you out, I think there is, to use a word that Kirby loves using, a misnomer that somehow that Tennessee is a finesse football team. Now, compared to Georgia, they are more finesse, and that's one of the reasons why Georgia has beaten them with margin for all these years that it has, is that matching the physicality of Georgia has proven too difficult for Tennessee to do, at least so far. But compared to the Big 12 style of spread or the old school, what used to be Pac-12 style of spread, where you put a lot of guys all over the place and it was mostly about getting receivers open and almost became a version of flag football. That's not what Tennessee is. The Tennessee spreads you for the purpose of running it. And if you want to keep their defense off their offense off the field, you've got to be able to run it and control the game, play at your pace, control the clock somewhat. And you know what? A year ago, I think the most underrated unit in the entire SEC was probably the Tennessee defense. This, a year ago, became a really good defense in a way that I'm not quite so sure that Josh Heupel, I ever thought he would probably be able to create, just given how much he asked his defense to put up with, because the offense plays so fast and all the stuff that goes along with that. But you got to take your hat off. Tennessee was a better defensive unit a year ago than I would have expected. At least some of that could be true this Saturday, despite the fact they also lost some off last year's team. That Georgia's physicality up front is going to matter because Tennessee wants to play up-tempo. They want to spread you out, but they still want to do it in an SEC-centric way. And obviously this is going to put a spotlight on, well, how healthy is Earnest Greene? How healthy is Juan Gaston? How much have they been able to do this week? Kirby was, as characteristically cryptic and non-revealing as you would have expected him to be on that. This is Kirby Smart once again from last night.
Yeah, they've both done some individual work, done some work against some scouts and things, and they're both moving around. Not sure where they'll stand. I get to go watch the tape of what they did today here in a few minutes, but they moved around pretty good in Indy.
So moving around pretty good, but what does that mean in particular? All we can do is guess. My guess is not worth very much, but it's not going to stop me from guessing. If I had to guess, Greene healthier than Gaston. We showed you the video a moment ago of Gaston before last week's game walking back to the locker room. We saw him coming into the stadium. This is pre-dog walk, coming in before the rest of the team, an indication of how healthy he was last week. Tough to gauge much from the gate there. The GAIT gate, I mean, how he's walking. The only thing we've said is for a big guy with an ankle, that's a lot of weight to put on an ankle. We just think that probably, if we had to guess, probably goes a little slow in terms of the overall recovery, but who knows? Sometimes we're surprised. Maybe we'll be surprised by this. If I had to guess, seems like Greene more likely to be healthy than Gaston, although the rumor mill seems to still think that Gaston's going to be fine. It's always been a question for me of, well, how soon is that true? Availability reports will come out for this game. They'll start coming out tonight, but I'm not quite so sure how much you really put stock into that until it gets later on in the week. We're at a time right now where all coaches, even Josh Heupel's the same way, really trying to keep a lockdown on injury information for this game. What about Earnest Greene last week with Jackson stepping in? It was actually Jackson and not Bo Hughley that got the start at right tackle last week. What about the issue at right tackle when Greene's not in? Kirby Smart also talking about that last night.
Yeah, Jazeer got banged up on, I think it was the second drive. It was after the drive with the fumble, the opening drive. He got a lateral ankle. He thought he could go, and he was struggling to move around on it. It was hurting him, but he pushed through because we were down some guys, and it's been bothering him even this week. But he keeps pushing through. Do we miss Earnest? Yeah, we miss Earnest if he's not out there and in the game. But he was over on the sideline leading, talking to guys and trying to help Jazeer.
So a question for me would be, it seems like week one, Bo Hughley got pretty positive reviews for how he played. He played in the second half on Saturday. People I talked to seem to think that was pretty good too, people that I trust on stuff like this, but not selected to start that game against Austin Peay. What was going on there? Now, you can ask until you're blue in the face. You're probably not going to get much of an answer, but that is a question I would at least be curious about, that if somehow Earnest Greene can't go, is it Bo Hughley that we will see at right tackle, and how much would the drop-off be from Greene to Hughley? It seems like, Bo has earned some praise. Maybe, for a while it was kind of quiet on the Bo Hughley front. Most of us would acknowledge that. It seems like he's added some good weight. It seems like he's ready to contribute. And if Greene can't go, can Hughley be the guy? No disrespect to Jai Jackson. One of these days, Jai Jackson may turn into Orlando Pace. I don't quite know, as inexperienced as he is, just from a football standpoint, not just college football, but football in general. I don't quite know that Jai Jackson's there just yet. Hughley would be the guy intuitively I might trust more. Is he ready to step in if Greene's not there? That's something I would be curious about, but I won't hold my breath for an answer. Now, a guy that did step in, another one of these freshmen, young guys, getting a chance to play, and best we can tell, kind of did okay, is Dontrell Glover. Glover, much like Juan Gaston before him, seems to be cutting the line and getting some playing time quicker than some would have expected over guys that have been here. Why is that going down? Well, Kirby Smart was very clear on that when he spoke last night.
Well, he's practiced the best. That's when you earn things at Georgia, is what you do in practice. And he's nowhere near where he needs to be, and he knows that. But he is strong-handed. He is tough and fiery. He is quick. He's a quick learner. But you can imagine a guy like Jared Dillon and Tate being here 3 and 4 years, some of them before they started, and that kid's being thrown out there right now. It just tells you, where he is in intelligence and where we are in depth.
So let's sum all this up this way. You know that Drew Bobo's your center. You feel pretty good about how Bobo's going to hold up here, both what the job requires physically, and as Kirby also talked about last night, this is a guy that also can certainly help with all the identification that needs to go on, the communication as the center. You feel like Bobo, that's a strength for him. Micah Morris, glad to have that veteran presence as your left guard. Honestly, it seems like Monroe Freeling's in pretty good shape right now for you as the right tackle. As the left tackle. Left side you feel good about. Freeling, Morris, Bobo at center. Right guard, is it Glover? Is it Gaston? Is it Weenie? Right tackle, is it Greene? Is it Jaw? Is it Hughley? Boy, a lot of mystery about that, and a lot of Georgia fans very curious to see who shows up to begin the game on Saturday and what it looks like for the entirety of the game, as Georgia needs more out of its offensive line. No doubt about that whatsoever. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, so many of the offensive linemen I just mentioned, homegrown, grew up getting big and strong, eating the kind of produce and the great cattle and meat and things that are raised and grown right here in the great state of Georgia. And that's what our folks at Georgia Farm Bureau are so proud of. For a long time, they have leaned into supporting Georgia's agricultural community, supporting Georgia's farmers. And the same level of support and care that they have taken and shown to Georgia's farmers, they can show that for you too. Because after all, you need insurance. And legally, you've got to have auto insurance, you've got to have home insurance, you probably need life insurance and the financial services products that exist in that space. And you're maybe curious about who you should work with. Well, my advice is always going to be work with friendly people. Work with Georgians just like yourself, people who are living and cheering for their favorite football team and going to games on Friday night and going to work every morning in communities just like yours all over the great state of Georgia. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about. So find them today. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Find out today why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, it's Davin Bellamy before we're done. But for more on the very much in flux situation with the Georgia offensive line, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Mike, I think I set the stage there a moment ago in terms of what I think is obviously one of the biggest storylines for Saturday. Left side of your offensive line, you know what that is. Monroe Freeling, seems like, he's got left tackle taken care of for right now, and early reports are doing pretty well. Micah Morris, this is a guy that dates back to your national championship era. You love having him at left guard. Drew Bobo certainly seems to be the player that could have the potential for giving Georgia a lift on Saturday, both physically but also just the cognitive aspects of what the center needs to know. Seems like Bobo very likely knows it. Right guard, right tackle, your guess is as good as mine. What do you expect to happen with the right side of the Georgia offensive line on Saturday?
Yeah, I think Ernest Greene's going to play. I mean, I think he's, I'm pretty confident in that. I mean, this is an experienced guy. This is a guy that I think you hold out of the last game to get healthy. You've got not just Tennessee, but you've got Alabama come up as well. I just don't think that's negotiable. And, as for Juan Gaston, BA, I'm not sure you want to plug a true freshman into this road environment anyway. You mentioned Glover a moment ago, and he actually graded out higher than anybody. Now, granted, it's Austin Peay, but it's what we've got to work with that we've seen in the media. Now, Kirby sees these guys every day at practice, and you heard him talk about how physical they've been in practice, so he's tested these guys as well. But listening to your interview with Jake Fromm earlier this week, I agree with what Jake said. I mean, this is going to be a simple game plan. Execution is going to be at a premium. Over the variety. You'd like to be able to go to the line of scrimmage and make adjustments and get yourself in the right play. But I remember Carson Beck telling us that, in stadiums like this, sometimes you run the play, and if you know it's the wrong play, you got to get the play off, and you don't want to risk making a communication mistake that, leads to a catastrophic play. And if you look at Georgia, the one thing you would say about this offense, or that you could say positive about this offense, is not a lot of penalties, no turnovers. And they've been efficient. They haven't been explosive, but they've been mostly efficient. And as far as the short yardage goes, there was, the snafu at the end of the first half against Austin Peay with those 5 plays. But other than that, Chauncey Bowen showed that he could convert some third and short runs pretty effectively. So I think Georgia has quietly found some answers. I think the game plan that we've seen for the first 2 games has been in preparation for this Tennessee game. And despite the, shuffling on the offensive line, I feel like this Georgia team can execute the game plan. It's just a matter of how well the defense plays against what Tennessee can do with Joey Aguilar.
I mean, listen, I don't necessarily put a lot of stock into, grades and things like that, but in the case of Glover, it does seem like Georgia has found something in him, maybe the same way they found something in Juan Gaston. And obviously, as you say, inexperienced player going into that's going to be true whether it's Glover or Gaston, by the way, but inexperienced player in the case of Gaston, if he were to play against Tennessee. The one thing that he brings to the table, though, is if you're trying to get some hard yards, man, he is so big. And not just, he's a big guy that also bends. Big presence. And I just think there could be a role for that beef on Saturday. So if he can play, I want him to. But I've just been suspicious of how likely that is to occur now for a few days. I'm also wrong, about injury stuff, certainly all the time. Maybe I'm wrong about this. But I'm just suspicious of whether or not Gaston's really healthy enough to play. You'd love to have them both, by the way, but suspicious if Gaston's going to be that guy.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's anybody's guess. I mean, Kirby Smart may not know. I mean, a lot of this is how these guys heal and when they get tested and, when they get the green light from the team doctor. So, it's not like, there's a right or wrong answer. It's just how it is, whether the guy's healthy enough. Now, if all things are equal and Kirby Smart has a chance to choose, then we could speculate, but without knowing the true health of these guys, it's really hard to make any evaluation. What we do know is that Georgia's played a lot of guys through 2 games. They've had as good of a warm-up ramp as anybody in the nation. They've gotten 2 really, really soft opponents at home, and that's all you could ask for. They gotten decent weather to prepare for. It wasn't 115 degrees all the way through August and September. I know Kirby lamented that in the mental toughness department, but in terms of being able to work on your execution, you've known Gunnar Stockton's your quarterback the whole offseason. There's not some transfer coming in here. This is a guy that he's been here 4 years. 4 years. He's had a chance to play in games for 3 seasons. He's appeared in 12. He's played on the biggest stage there is in college football, in the college football playoff and the SEC championship game. So as far as preparation goes, Georgia really couldn't ask for a better hand. Yeah, the offensive line injuries are unfortunate, but neither one of these are season ending. And to your point, both of these guys might be ready. So, this is as ready as Georgia can be. And still, there's some things working against them. I didn't even think about this till this morning, Brandon, but, you really would rather play Tennessee later in the season every year just because of all the different things they do and how well schooled your team needs to be able to react as quickly as you have to react on defense with this hurry up offense and be assignment sound in a road environment. You'd rather not start in front of 100,000 against a team that tests you in these ways. And this happens to be the earliest the Georgia-Tennessee game's been played since 1995. So you caught kind of a bad break there. But on the flip side, I don't think Joey Aguilar's really seen an SEC defense yet. And Tennessee's got to wonder what this quarterback's going to do against a fearsome defense. And you and I know that Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart have not dialed up the pressure like they're going to, have not shown the different coverage packages and different personnel packages. So there's a lot of mystery in what the Tennessee defense is going to bring. And Josh Heupel kind of hinted that, said, yeah, there's just not a lot of film. So that guy's kind of tentative too now. He hadn't figured out Kirby Smart yet. So both of these teams have some puzzles to solve in real time on Saturday.
So if you go back and listen to everything that Smart, and by the way, the assistant coaches, many of the players, I'm talking about months and months and months, the refrain repeated consistently was, we want to be better running the ball. We want to be better at stopping the run. And Saturday is, for me, Mike, the day in which that has got to be put on display. It's when we start with the offensive line, because obviously the offensive line plays a big part in all of that. This was a Georgia team that statistically, by its own standards, by anybody's standard offensively, by its own standard defensively when it comes to stopping the run, below that a year ago. This is the moment to prove how real that is. A trio of what looks like Frazier, Bowens, and Phillips. That's your 3 running backs. A defensive line rotation that, obviously is shaping up here too. Can you run the ball? Can you stop the run? If you can, you've probably beaten Tennessee again. And if you can't, then it's all up for grabs at that point. But this is the game you demonstrate is your year-long offseason mission of running the ball better, stopping the run. Did you actually get that done? That's what's on display on Saturday. And, Mike, I think the game is as simple as that for Georgia.
Yeah, and this is where, for all the, fingernail biting and concerns about Gunnar Stockton, you're glad you've got a mobile quarterback, right? Because we've talked about the offensive line not being as good, and Kirby's talked about Gunnar's ability to make good decisions and avoid the catastrophic play. He has not fallen behind the chains in the situations. He's kept Georgia in good down and distance situations by not getting sacked. You haven't seen a lot of confusion when it comes to false start penalties or delay of games that get you 5 yards back. We see that from opponents, but for the most part, Gunner's done a good job not getting himself beat or getting the team beat, and that's where this offense is. And this is the style of offense that Kirby Smart believes is best with this personnel grouping right now. And that's not to say that if Georgia falls behind, by major points and has to just go strictly to the air, that they wouldn't look at other options. I mean, there was Kirby used to talk about that even when Stetson was here. So they've got a lot of weapons. They've got a lot of different ways they can do things, but the head coach is confident that with this personnel that he has at this stage of everyone's career, that this is what gives Georgia their best chance. And so I think Gunnar Stockton, with his mobility on the road, I think this is the best case scenario coming out. And I feel like as long as Georgia doesn't beat themselves, they've got a really good chance of winning this football game. I know everyone's hung up on the numbers and Tennessee scoring 72 points in their last game or lighting up Syracuse or whatever, but they haven't seen a defense like this. And those expectations can work against you. I remember, and Brandon, I know you remember this too, you and I were working together in 2017 going into that game. And Tennessee was striping their stadium, the checker kneeling thing. And I remember telling you, Georgia is going to blast this. They're going to blast Tennessee. And you were saying, I hope so. Last year I said, no chance. And Georgia just bulldozed. Tennessee felt so much pressure. They were honoring Peyton Manning that day and striping the stadium against a team they had no business striping that stadium against. And I think there's a lot of false bravado right now in Knoxville. A lot of, well, this is the year. Everybody's saying we're supposed to win. And it just, there's no real tangible proof of that yet when you look at Tennessee's schedule. They haven't beaten anyone. So there's questions for Tennessee too. They're just not as apparent because they've run the score up. Georgia, on the other hand, has not tried to. They haven't shown anything on offense. You haven't seen the shifts, the motions, the special packages. You haven't seen anything from the defense. So two very different approaches as Heupel's tried to get his team confidence, put a lot of points and offense on the board. And Kirby Smart's just been chopping wood, building this team, trying to develop them and keeping things vanilla on Saturdays and saving all the tricks for behind the walls of practice.
Yeah, Tennessee also scored 70 in a game last year, too, and it didn't stop them 2 weeks later from losing straight up to Arkansas, so I don't make too much about that.
Yeah.
I said before you joined us that along the lines of what you're saying, and listen, I think for the most part, Heupel's been successful at Tennessee. Been to the playoff, beaten Alabama twice. Compared to the more-bound nature of that program before he got there, those are significant accomplishments. And yet, none of that's come against Georgia. So if there is pressure in this game, it rests with the team playing in its own stadium, having had no success against this opponent. If there is real, tangible pressure, it's on Tennessee and not on Georgia. Now, that's mostly shouting to the void because the emotion's still going to be what it is if Georgia loses any game to any of its rivals. That's just the nature of it. But from a logical standpoint, far more pressure on Tennessee than Georgia, I believe. What do you think?
No question. And Knoxville's a different town than Athens. I mean, Kirby does a really nice job of insulating these guys. And in Knoxville, it's just not like that. These guys feel the presence of the community around them, especially when everybody and their brothers betting on Tennessee. I mean, you're an expert on the betting line. We're gonna tape Go with the Flow later today, the show that we do, sponsored by R.S. Andrews. It's so much fun. And you know this as well as I do, that for that betting line to drop from 7 to 3 points, that is a lot of money. Now, gambling is legal in Tennessee. It's not in Georgia. So I don't know how much influence that really has in the big picture, but I think this particular week, I'd say there's a lot of Tennessee dollars that are invested in Josh Heupel to get this done. And if he doesn't, it's shades of 1990s Tennessee when I covered the program. They did everything but beat Florida. Florida was the hurdle. They just couldn't get by that game. And now Georgia is that hurdle for Josh Heupel. Like you said, he's beaten Florida and Alabama 2 of the last 3 years. And the Tennessee coaches get judged on Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. And this is the crown jewel that he has not been able to. He's got his team to the playoff. And they turn fast in Tennessee. Remember last year, Nico? They love Nico. The program spent $8 million. They were flying his family in, whining and dining. He was the greatest thing ever. And he decides he doesn't want to play there, and now he's the devil, right? So if Josh Heupel loses this game, it's going to be such a kick in the pants for him and his program. Well, here we go again. Can't get it done. And then for Kirby Smart, it galvanizes his system that even in a year with 54% of his roster being first or second year guys, even with Gunnar Stockton, an uncelebrated quarterback, and an offense that's plodding along that can't score from the one against Austin Peay, they can still rise to the occasion and suck the life out of Tennessee and 100,000 people. So you're right. The pressure is squarely on Tennessee this week.
All right, Mike, good stuff. Read more from me at DawgNation.com. We'll see you. And by the way, last week we tried this, and it seemed to work okay. We'll do it again. We're actually going to drop Go with the Flow early. We recorded it on Wednesdays. We're going to drop it on Wednesday. So if people want early thoughts on some of these games from a point spread perspective, we'll give it to you coming up on the DawgNation video channels today. So that's worth your time.
I got
Mike.
One for you, Brandon.
By all means.
I know you're the Gator hater supreme, and I just talked to my buddy Edgar Thompson in Orlando, and of course, they've already got the contract numbers for Billy Napier. But on Florida's schedule, the next 3 games, the combined ranking of the teams is 15.
Yeah.
That's only happened once before and been lower in history. And that was 1996 when Spurrier played a number 1 Florida State, a number 11 Alabama, and a number 1 Florida State. But the 3 other times in Florida history where they've had 3 straight games with opponents having a combined ranking of 20 or less, they went 1-7-1. So the history for Florida here does not bode well. And DJ Lagway not at 100%. So for the Georgia fans, yes, all eyes are definitely going to be on Knoxville at 3:30. But come that night, win or lose, the attention will turn to Baton Rouge and the Billy Napier Death March in Death Valley, as he's going to need a miracle to save his job this year.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks, PA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So a couple things here just for a moment. Yeah, the Florida schedule is ridiculous, 100%. And I tell you whose schedule now is just about as bad. It's kind of funny. It's both the hot seat coaches. It's Brent Venables and Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma looks far better because they just beat Michigan. But coming up, Oklahoma basically plays, I guess with the exception of Georgia, just about every other ranked SEC team. It's really insane what their schedule's about to be, and we're big-time Gatorators. But we also acknowledge what Florida's been asked to do in SEC play the last 2 years, while also playing the likes of Miami out of conference, and Florida State too, for that matter, it's the wildest schedule I've ever seen. That is 100% true. And we can bring that music down, maybe just one more tiny notch. And gambling nerd stuff just for a second. This is deep in the weeds. Many of you don't care. If you go to one of these big gambling aggregator sites where they like show you all of the various books and the line they have for Georgia, Tennessee, and when it opened, oftentimes the opening line is essentially incorrect because some of the biggest gambling aggregators, their opening line is what the line was in May when they first dropped games of the year, some of the books that put these early lines out. I said, this is deep in the weeds, but I'm going to do this for 2 seconds. So if you see, well, the game opened at 7.5. I never saw 7.5 this week. I saw 6.5 this week. I never saw 7.5. So my point is, and I looked at FanDuel a moment ago. That's not a sponsor. It's just a big book, one of the 2 biggest books that are out there. FanDuel still got Georgia, Tennessee at 4.5 after being 3.5. So it is true there has been line movement. Thing opened at 6.5, sunk like a stone, down to about 3.5. At least at FanDuel, it's back up to 4.5 again. But as many of you know, the movement in between 6.5 and 3.5 is almost all cosmetic. Not to say that you can't finish on a 4-5 or a 6-point margin, but those are not considered key numbers. If you really do drop between 7.5 and 7, or if it really were to go below 3.5 to 3, or even below that, now you're talking about a move that matters, that's going to get people moving on the other side. But unlike Tennessee, Georgia games of the past where the line didn't budge at all, this one has moved, and yet it's only moved between the cosmetic numbers of 6.5 down to 5.5, down to 4.5, 3.5, back up to 4.5. Those are not key numbers the way that a 7 and a 3 would be. That's very deep in the weeds gambling stuff, but nonetheless, I think most of you know where I'm coming from on that. That the line movement isn't quite as it has been recognizable, but it's not necessarily predictive in this case. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Then after that, we should probably bring on Davin Bellamy because for the Cal Ripken streak of 2,131 consecutive shows, we are running a little bit late here. So let me give a shout out to Royal Caribbean. We'll talk to Davin Bellamy, and then we'll do some stories before we wrap it up after that. And I got to tell you this. One of the things that I love about Royal Caribbean are the really cool touches they do almost just for fun. For instance, on Star of the Seas, they have what you call an ultimate family suite. Now, I've been lucky enough as a distinguished member of the broadcast media to be invited on some of the preview sailings for these ships. I've actually seen the ultimate family suite. Now, I have never stayed at the ultimate family suite, and I have to tell you, while I do think I have the ultimate family, I don't believe we'll ever be necessarily staying in the ultimate family suite. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't stay in the ultimate family suite. What an unbelievable experience this is. It is the utmost luxury experience, multiple levels, panoramic balcony that stretches, what feels like almost a quarter of the ship. It's just a totally gorgeous thing. It's just a special touch that Royal Caribbean puts on its ships just for fun, and some lucky family gets to stay there. There's like a movie theater inside, basically like a entertainment room that can be almost like a movie theater, and the kitchen table has like a gaming system built into the table. When you walk up and down the stairs, I've done this. As you step on each stair, it plays like a piano note, and you can like run down the stairs, and it almost plays a melody. it's an amazing experience. It's worth checking out, even seeing it online, even if maybe that's not quite the booking category you would be in if you were to go on a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation. It's still fun to see. So you can talk to Jessica Slater. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Here's what I know about Jessica. She'd love for you to book the Ultimate Family Suite. She'd be standing by right now for you to do so. But if you want a cruise line that takes care of its families and thinks really every family is the ultimate family, well, Royal Caribbean's the place for you too. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That is jslater@dreamvacations.com. I also love the fact that you do have suite-only neighborhoods for those of you who do want that upgraded experience. It means you have separate lounging space and pool space. Royal Caribbean really knows how to do it right for those who want that slightly elevated experience, or in the case of the Ultimate Family Suite, extraordinarily elevated. You can get all of that. All right, so we're going to do kind of a hurry up, no huddle here. We'll get back to cruise around the SEC in a moment. Let's get ready to talk to Davin Bellamy right now because I have kept him waiting long enough. Davin, we always value your presence in the show. Days like this, it's important. The sense that I get, having not played before, is this Tennessee offense really puts a stress on the defense. Now, somehow, some way, Georgia handles it pretty well, at least so far it has. But when you're talking about putting a lot of defenders in one-on-one situations, basically saying, if you miss this tackle, this play's going for 30 yards, that just seems like a lot of pressure to play with snap for snap for snap. You've played every level of the game there is. Tell me what it's like facing one of these really wide spreads where you're X and Z receiver essentially outside the numbers and you're covering sideline to sideline. What does that do to a defense?
Yeah, man. Coach Smart, he likes to call it basketball, on grass.
Yeah.
They just line up further outside than your normal teams do, which means your defensive alignments, they have to get wider. What I think is a genius out of Coach Smart is the adjustment that he made is we don't adjust to them. We adjust to, like, for example, if you're playing, Tennessee and you're a linebacker, you have to, walk out. If they're lined up by the sideline, that means now that linebacker isn't between the numbers in the hash. He has to walk out further, which just throws off your spacing and gives them more space. So what Coach Smart started to do was forget how they line up. We're going to line up in our regular spaces. Therefore, our blitz can hit. Because the further you line up, like if I got a linebacker lined up by the numbers, and then I call a blitz, well, Tennessee's lined up so far. If he's lined up on Tennessee, he's not going to have time to get to the quarterback. So Coach Smart has done a great job, which I think a lot of teams are going to try to steal is don't line up on Tennessee, line up at your, normal formations. And usually when we bring pressure against, Tennessee, it usually hits. That's been their kryptonite, against us. But we're going to have to make them one-dimensional, not you throw in the hurry up offense, which speeds up the brain. Now we can't get, multiple plays in. We're running the same plays, trying to keep up with their speed. And you align that with the spacing that they give you. It causes a lot of confusion, on the defensive side of the ball. But Coach Smart has just done a great job of just, adjusting, to that over the last couple of years.
So there are two things I feel like I see. One of those things is if you can get an incompletion, everything seems to get easier. I noticed this in 2022 when as long as they're completing passes and moving fast, it's almost as if the crowd can't even get into the game the way that it wants to because it's moving so fast, you don't have time to yell if you're a fan. But when they get an incompletion, everything slows down. You almost even have time to substitute if you want to. You clearly have a chance to reset, and now it just puts a little more pressure back on the Tennessee side that for the most part, they're getting short, easy stuff. They're moving down the field and they're almost leaning on you in the hopes that you'll make a mistake and then they'll bust one. But if you can get one incompletion, now the game just slows down enough that the defense regains a little bit of an advantage, does it not?
No doubt, because their whole thing is to stay, ahead of the stick. So they do a great job on first down of maybe just getting 5 yards. Now we cooking with oil because we're working with 2nd and 5. And now the defense is just always playing, catch up, trying to get them in 3rd and longs. And when you get them in those, second and fives, that's when their running game shows up. But if we can get them behind the sticks, because they don't really want, to run the ball over and over and over again. They only run the ball in kind of guaranteed run situations, second and 5, third and 1. But that first down play is so critical because if we can turn that to second and 11, now they're, at the mercy of if we get two, incompletions, now it's third and 11. Now we're playing in Georgia hands, and that's when the multiple fronts, come out. That's when you got inside backers, rushing that edge. You got edge players lined up in the A gaps. That's when Georgia can get a little freaky. So it's always been a game plan against, Tennessee is to get them behind the sticks. Because one, they do not want to run the ball. And if we can get them behind the sticks, they're not going to run the ball on, second and 11, second and 12, and try to force two incompletions, back to back. And then we get them that third and long. But like I say, Coach Smart is a genius, when it comes to, figuring out this just air raid. And I think the same results will happen.
The other thing that I feel like I've noticed, and once again, this comes from the perspective of a non-player, but I've been lucky enough to be on the field sometimes for overtime periods. And I think the perspective you get watching the game played in a short space is really interesting. I'm oversimplifying it, but nonetheless, the job of the defense just seems easier. When the safeties don't have to worry about over their head and behind their back, their job just gets a little easier. And I'm not saying that Georgia's going to be content to let Tennessee get into the red zone every time, but knowing they're going to get something, if they're just dinking and dunking and trying to wait for you to have a bust, if you'll just not have a bust and make a tackle, in other words, don't do something dumb and give them 40 yards, but if you can just keep the ball in front of you, make a tackle, and then as it gets closer to the red zone, star two safeties, their job gets a little easier. Well, now maybe you make the play that keeps them from getting a touchdown or forces a turnover. Keely Ringo had a pick in the 2022 game, for instance, in a situation like this. Force the field goal try, keep them from getting points, force a turnover, just avoid the bust, make your tackles, and before the drive ends, you're going to have a chance to throw your own knockout blow that maybe ends their possession. Is that a description?
Yes, I mean, when you're playing a team like, a Tennessee, it's a bend but no break style of D. It's like playing, the Warriors. If you shoot 43s, a game and you go 20%, you still hit more threes than the other team that's not shooting as many threes. So that's their style of thinking is, we're going to take our shots downfield. And even if we don't have a high, completion rating, some of those deep shots may turn into pass interferences. The defense may, mess up. And now we got a red zone opportunity. But Georgia's going to have to, of course, know that those big plays are going to happen. But when you get inside the red zone, that yardage kind of shrinks and they can't spread you out. Now you're just playing basic 11 on 11 football when you get in the red zone. And that's where Tennessee struggled, especially against a team like Georgia that's just way more, physical than them, in the front seven, because once you get in the red zone, there's no more tricking. There's no more lining up outside the numbers and these crazy, routes. You got to run it in. And it's tough to do that against Georgia. So it's always been the mindset of, playing Tennessee is they're going to get theirs. They are going to get theirs just because they shoot 43s a game. So they're going to get, theirs. But when it gets in the red zone, let's hold them to 3. And if we can hold them to 3 and get our O back up there and play the style that we play, ball control, which is going to help the defense tremendously, is, how well do we run the ball? Can we control the game clock? Can we wear down their defense with long drives and then get quick 3 and outs with first down, incompletions? And now we put that defense back out there, to stop the run again for another 15 play drive. That's just a recipe. It, has always been, on beating Tennessee. So I definitely think you're right. When it gets down to the red zone, it gets more condensed, and that definitely doesn't play, into Tennessee's favor.
All right, so let me finish with this. On the other side of the ball, Been some talk. Gunnar Stockton himself has even said it. Need to play with more confidence. Need to be more comfortable. We're led to believe he's had success during practice. Now needs that to translate to the games. How does a locker room help a quarterback do that?
Man, you know what? You never really say, nothing to the QB.
Yeah.
Even when the QB's playing bad, it's always positive during practice, in the game. Quarterback, critique from players is off limits. All players know he has the most, on his plate. The best
Yeah.
thing you could do is to be more encouraging, just really at all times. But Brandon, in my opinion, man, those first 2 games, I feel like we did a lot of things that we know that we could do with our hands tied behind back. We know we can throw screens.
Yeah.
We know we can throw the bubble screens. I wanted to see Georgia give Gunnar more confidence by letting him do. What you do in the dark comes to the light. What you do in practice shows up in the game. It's kind of crazy just to think that the first 2 games we throw these long, handoffs and then expect the guy to go into Knoxville, 3rd and 9, and deliver a pass from the pocket 20 yards downfield in tight coverage. Not saying he can't do that, but like I always say, he's a young player, and the quickest way he's going to get better is reps, alongside reps at practice, but reps in the game. Those first 2 games, I want to see Gunnar Stockton build his confidence through play calling. I want to see Bobo and them just have more confidence in him through play calling and letting him go through his reads and more of a traditional drop back passing game. Therefore, he knows that he could do it. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that's what a young player needs. They can do it at practice and it look good. But until you do it in the game and it works, now your brain says, we could do this all the time. We can do it against Georgia State. We can do it against Tennessee. So that's where his confidence is going to grow. I don't think handcuffing the playbook the first 2 games was the right thing to do. But I have full confidence in Gunnar this week. We've seen him thrown into the most tough situations that most quarterbacks, I don't care how old you are, would struggle in. His Notre Dame against Texas, postseason play, a lot of pressure. So I think he can do it. But just to your question of how do you gain that confidence comes through, play calling.
No, I think that's right. I think that's strong stuff, Davin. Appreciate you. Looking forward to a fun one this weekend. Looking forward to talking to you about it again very soon. Thank you for being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always, baby. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
And the Dogs will cover too. I think so.
I love it. Hey, listen. I tell you what, that's actual intelligence right there. I'll take that any day of the week. That's good stuff, Davin. Appreciate that.
No doubt. Have a good one.
You too, and well. So, Davin not only giving you a pick and a cover right there, liking the Dogs minus the points. There hasn't been a lot of that this week. Has not been a lot of that this week. So, Davin not only taking the pick, but willing to put his money where his mouth is. Okay, before we get ready to wrap up, let's give you a couple of other stories here, just for a moment. Obviously, cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. You perhaps have followed the story. Do you know who Haley Sawyer is? She's an AP poll voter, I believe, based out of California. Came under fire this week because she had Florida moving up in her AP poll after Florida lost last week. Now, I don't know that we've had any official explanation for why she did this. If I had to guess, she simply didn't know that Florida lost. If I had to guess, that would be my guess, although I don't really know. And for me, this goes beyond just Sawyer, although I do think criticism of her is fair. It goes beyond just Sawyer in that, as I've told you, I think the college football media is just broken. And I don't think this media, whether it's Paul Feinbaum hyping up Arch Manning or New York Times writing about Texas being the new Alabama or this gal in California who's, making a mess of her top 25 vote, I just don't think the national media overall serves college football fans very fair. I really don't. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why we've seen, without getting too into all this, these other, what I would say, non-traditional business entities rise up to cover college football. You don't see a lot of subscription sites covering the NFL, a lot of subscription sites covering the NBA. You just don't really see a lot of that. It's just regular general mainstream media because the regular general mainstream media is typically covered those sports in just the normal way. college football's always been just a really weird thing when it comes to that. And, I mean, judge for yourself. I mean, I will tell you that 90% sometimes of what I'm looking at online when it comes to college football chatter is essentially one fan talking to another. What are people saying on social media? What are people saying on the boards? What are people saying in our chat? Like 90% of what I follow on when it comes to college football is just what fans are saying to each other, because I got to tell you, I'll take 12 fans picked at random to make a top 25 or college football playoff, selections, things like that. Even non-Georgia fans, I just think I trust fans at large more so than I trust most of the media people. So this young lady is going to get most of the attention here. Clearly could have done a better job. But for me, if I'm being honest, I think the national media that covers college football is kind of broken, and I think some of it's because they just don't respect college football fans. But that's maybe a different topic for a different day. But nonetheless, speaking of the AP Top 25, the teams that are ranked high in the AP Top 25 are now getting ready for some big games coming up in Week 3. And I would say that there are some big ones that are worth your attention. We haven't done a ton of these yet. Sometimes it takes us until Wednesday to get to this. But beyond just Georgia, Tennessee, there are games of note. A lot of those are in the SEC. Not all of them. It's funny that South Florida, once again, for instance, finds itself as a 17.5-point underdog again against an in-state foe, this time against Miami. Georgia Tech, Clemson's a pretty interesting game. Talk about line movement. That game is moving fast in the direction of Tech, despite the fact that Haynes King is apparently not healthy, although it's worth noting they did sandbag King's health before last year's Georgia game. Maybe they're doing that again. I think LSU Florida is fascinating. Be really, really careful with that. And I say this as someone who hates the lousy, stinking Gators, but nonetheless, friend to friend, be really, really careful with Florida LSU. Be really, really careful. I'll tell you this, if I could watch any game this week, South Carolina, other than Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Vanderbilt might be my pick. I think that's an awesome game. Can't wait for that. Surely Alabama makes it look easy against Wisconsin. Wisconsin is terrible. This is a really bad whiskey team. Surely Alabama gets it figured out, gets it on track there. I'll also give you one more to watch for now. We'll do more of these picks on Go With The Flow, which will drop for you on the DawgNation video channels today. Let's watch Texas A&M and Notre Dame. Notre Dame was nothing special against Miami. This is a Texas A&M team that began the year with a win total of 8.5. That's pretty good in the SEC. This is an A&M team that should be pretty good. Now, they lost at home to Notre Dame a year ago, but this does not feel like the same Notre Dame team. Not to say that they're bad. It just doesn't feel like the same Notre Dame team. I have told you during the offseason, something seems off for me about Texas A&M. Not quite what it's supposed to be. Somehow that the sum is not adding up to what the individual parts suggest that it should be. And I don't blame Mike Elko for that, because I think Elko's a pretty good coach. Draft capital-wise, they may have as much on this team as they've had in a long time. Something doesn't quite feel right in A&M. Let's just watch and see on that with Notre Dame coming up on Saturday. Could be a lot of fun. Then finally, very quick, let me give you this. And this is not the kind of thing we talk about in season, but it's just worth noting. I have talked to what I would think of as important people recent days. There's a lot of optimism right now around college athletics, as college football in particular, that we may get a chance to really only have one transfer portal window. And it would be early in the year, and it would impact the college football playoff teams. Nothing's perfect. But we would do away with the spring portal, which is what the coaches hate. And it would have the chance to bring some of the much-needed stability to college athletics in a way that's just fairly easy to do. You don't need 1,000 court cases. You don't need a bunch of crazy stuff. You just say to the players, you guys are well paid right now, but we're going to do one portal window, take it or leave it. And I think you'd probably do okay with that. I really do. Because honestly, the spring portal is not really cracking up to be everything it's supposed to be. Well, guess what? Right on cue, you got Ryan Day yesterday saying that he's not in favor of this, and he doesn't believe the other Big Ten coaches are in favor of this too. I just want you to notice this. I don't have time to do more than 2 seconds on this, but I just want you to notice. Every single thing that makes college football feel like college football, the Big Ten is always against it. Anything that's radical change that makes the sport completely reimagined and basically a watered down version of professional sports, the Big Ten is in favor of that every single time. we need the Big Ten to lose. In this arms race between the SEC and the Big Ten, this isn't just regional pride, although I think that matters. I am proud of the state that I'm from. I am proud of the people that I was raised next to, and I think that matters. And sometimes that's all that needs to be true. But beyond that, the SEC is for protecting college sports and making sure it thrives. The Big Ten is for reinventing it and making it something brand new. And this newest debate that may take place over reducing it down to one transfer portal window is the exact example of that. All the serious people seem to think this is a good thing and it can't happen. Naturally, the Big Ten is going to stand there in the way of it, as they have done so many times in the past. Now, let me give you one quick shout out before we get ready to go today. As we say, we'll call that Cruiser on the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. How about our friends at Georgia Spa Company? Big part of what we do on game day and a big part of your experience at home to make your home feel as comfortable and relaxed as it could be. A great spa, a hot tub, a sauna, one of these, you see the almost like the individual wave pools. They can do those things for you. All kinds of, kind of like an endless pool where you can swim in it and it keeps flowing the water. It's great exercise without having to take up a ton of space. You can turn your home into a resort with our friends at Georgia Spa Company, working with some of the great makers and brands such as Hot Spring Spas, Caldera Spas, Endless Pools, Tylo Saunas, and a whole lot more. Friendly expert staff. Spa Guru is going to come out, look at your space, and give you the perfect solution for exactly what you want. Hands-on to make sure you get everything you need and all that. They'll deliver it, they'll install it, and they'll make sure it's ready to function exactly the way that you want it to. They've got over 35,000 satisfied customers, more than 4,500 five-star reviews. So you know this company comes well recommended. 7 locations across North Georgia. You can also find them online, georgiaspacompany.com. But stop by and see them in store to get the best experience. One of 7 locations all across North Georgia, or online, georgiaspacompany.com. Great to have them as a part of what we're doing here around DawgNation Daily. And as we wrap up here on one of our longer shows in a while, did not plan for it to be that way, but it turned into that. Obviously, still plenty of chatter around the notion of will we do something to commemorate the gross escapade from Florida on Saturday. By the way, the guy that was involved in the spitting incident has now apologized for it, so I guess all is forgiven. Something tells me lousy, stinking Gators fans probably not feeling that way. But more support here for the, as it's being called, the Golden Spittoon. Scott Moody writing in to say, if you decide to change it up for the Golden Shoe for the lousy, stinking Gators, maybe you could have the Golden Spittoon. So there is back chatter. There could be some sort of spittoon that does make its appearance. Never in replacement of the Golden Shoe. There is brand equity in place for the Golden Shoe now. But could the Golden Spittoon at least make an appearance? People are saying perhaps that's the case. Either way, Scott, we'll give you a Golden Shoe for that. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? 1,768 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. The work that's promised for the price is promised. That's what our friends at R.S. Andrews will do for you each and every day. Okay, so I told our video audience that was with us to begin the show live this. Got to be quick today. I'm going to do like 15 minutes of very quick comments. After that, I've got some business I've got to take care of, but we're going to we'll roll through as much as we can here. Jonathan Aaron says, who do you think Texas' 3 permanent opponents will be? Well, given the easy schedule that they've been given thus far, I'm guessing they'll play Vanderbilt 3 times. But in all seriousness, so Oklahoma be 1. It should be Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Arkansas is who it should be. That's who it should be. Now, somebody may complain about that, but their 3 permanent opponents should be Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. And that seems about fair. That seems about right, but that's who it should be. We'll see if that's what it ends up being. So Wyatt Fielding's birthday is on Saturday. He wants a birthday shout-out because he got to be away from the show. Wyatt, happy birthday indeed. Hopefully George can give you a big win on Tennessee against Tennessee on Saturday for a birthday present. Jerry Dogfan says before the 12-team playoff, an early season loss was easier to recover from than a late season loss. Did the playoff format correct that at least? I don't know about that so much. I think the playoff, the way that you're describing it, it probably is a little easier to take a late loss now than it used to be. My thing is that early losses are better because you have the potential of more losses to come. If you're one of these good SEC teams, you're just playing a tough schedule. Y'all, last year's national champion lost twice. I think that's a template for the future. I mean, as much as it pains me to admit, Georgia's going to probably lose to somebody this year. They could lose twice. That's just a real thing that's going to happen. And so practical reality is the longer you postpone that loss, the better it is. It was always an erroneous thought process to assume that somehow a late loss was worse than an early loss, but that's the way the poll voters think. But we now have greater sense of who the poll voters are. But if there are so many losses you can't sustain until the committee shows different, that's basically the way they think about this sort of thing, then the longer you can go without losing, the better it is. Georgia needs to do that. Zach Adams says, need Friday to get here. Yeah, looking forward to a fun weekend. Matt Rukavina, Philip Jordan Wells, a little shout out to the Simpsons there with Cletus the slack-jawed yokel, a great minor Simpsons character. I love the Simpsons. I guess somebody says this has turned into a gambling show. Look, here's the thing about gambling. And when it comes to how you project an outcome, it's one thing to say, well, I think Georgia may do okay on Saturday. Well, what specifically does that mean? Or listen, I'd watch out for Tennessee on Saturday. What specifically does that mean? And it's okay to be broad and general in your regular conversations because nobody really remembers. But when it comes to a sports talk conversation, you need to be as specific as you possibly can. As I've said over and over again, I'd be careful if you ever plan on betting your hard-earned money on something. Things are not ever quite as true as sometimes they think, and what you feel like is actionable intelligence isn't necessarily always that way. But we're going to try to be as specific as we can, if for no other reason than predictions are interesting. They create some drama. BA said this. Did that turn out to be true or not? We did that on Friday. I got some nice people who sent a nice message because we, in a roundabout way, predicted Ellis Robbins get an interception, and he did. It's just a small thing, but it's a little bit of drama based around a prediction because ultimately that's what really sports conversations are. This is my prediction of what I think is going to happen. We'll only be right about half the time. We don't take ourselves too seriously on that. But nonetheless, that's what the exercise of sports talk is all about. Brian Lindsay, speaking of predictions, says, I think we get to see Mr. Griffin become a true dog this week. Elijah Griffin stepping up, freshman defensive lineman like that. I think that'd be a really good thing. Winfred Steinspring, checking out. Appreciate that. Matt Rukavina says those casinos don't build themselves out in the desert. People know what they're doing. It's also it's fascinating to me about how counterintuitive some of this is. That's what's interesting. I am a contrarian by nature. I'm talking about in my regular life that when the entire world's going one way, I'm usually looking to go the other. Warren Buffett said it like this: I am greedy when everybody else is panicked, and I am panicked when everybody else is greedy. And I pretty much live my life that way. And there are elements of that show up in the way that college football games play out too. And I don't apologize for being fascinated by that. I really don't. Let's see what else. About 5 more minutes. What else? Isaac Cruz, by the way, speaking of predictions, got big plays for the tight ends. I'd like to see that. I really would. I mean, Kirby said something interesting on Saturday. He wasn't saying this directly to me, but it is something I've thought a lot. He said, people assume that throwing the tight ends is easier. The truth is, I've always kind of assumed it probably was easier too. The big targets, oftentimes middle of the field, a little easier to hit your tight end maybe than some of the other routes. He said, no, it's not necessarily always the case. But, Georgia, I think, has at least 3 tight ends that need to be playing pretty regularly. Obviously, Ethan Barbour would have been one of these because he played a lot early in the last 2 games, maybe as a surprise, more so than folks would have realized. Now he's hurt, ankle injury, pretty serious. But Delp, Lucky, and I'd say Jaden Riddell at the very least need to be on the field. I do think it's curious, and you could ask Kirby, he's not going to answer, but they did at least a couple of times line up Barbour, not as an H-back, but like a real fullback. He's wearing 9. So it wasn't just the H-back in motion stopping before the ball is snapped. He lined up as a traditional fullback in what basically was an I formation. I wonder with Barbour now injured if somebody else will do that some for Georgia. Trevor Maffetone says, is there news on Gaston? There will be an injury report that comes out tonight. There will be, and it'll be updated a couple of times. And I would say it's probably fairly meaningless for the most part. So there's nothing new other than he did some stuff yesterday. We played that clip for you during the show. Early periods, what they call indie, did do some of that. There are people close to Gaston that'll tell you they think he's on his way to being healthy very, very soon, if not now. I just don't know for Saturday, though. Just don't know. Let's see what else. Jerry Dog fan bringing up the scrimmages. I mean, look, there were a lot of people that saw the first scrimmage. There were some people that saw the second. The people that saw the second scrimmage this summer will tell you that Gunnar Stockton played amazing. People who saw the first would tell you that neither quarterback, Puglisi or Stockton, necessarily had great games or great performances. Not a game, a performance. That's the basic gist of that. Sin Hotlanta says line's going to be 2.5 before long. Yeah, I bet you it doesn't. I'm occasionally wrong. I bet this line doesn't get 2.5. I really don't think it will. I don't think it will. Trevor Maffetone says, do I own any gold? I don't know that I want to get into my personal investment philosophy just because that's not what I'm paid to do. But maybe one of these days we'll talk about that on an alternate channel. That's a very funny question. One of these days, maybe we'll talk about that, but maybe just not on this channel. Bill Sanders says Gaston will probably be listed as questionable in the first injury report. If I had to guess, that's probably what it is, and that can change. And a lot of the stuff they make him do early in the week is just for window dressing anyway. It's really the one on Saturday that matters. All right, a couple of more, then we're going to go. Let me go to DawgNation.com. How about this? Silver Britches throwing it back to the past. And, boy, there's some great moments in Georgia's history in Neyland. Says we're going to step on their face with a hobnail boot, break their nose. I do love that. Garrison Tucker says what Georgia receiver has the longest catch on Saturday? I'm going to go with Noah Thomas. That's my pick to click on that. Johnny Prescott says in honor of Dolly Parton picking games on game day this week, I'm going with the Dogs. He says 9-5 in an epic D. Is Dolly Parton really the guest picker? By the way, having Dolly in the building didn't work out too well for him last time against Georgia. Either way, he picks Georgia win 9-5. Epic defensive struggle. Hopefully her microphone works Saturday and the band gives her a chance to be heard. Surely they're not doing that again because I'm talking about we all have reverence for the great Dolly Parton, just an all-time great in so many ways. What they did to her in 2023 was an abomination. Forcing her to sing Rocky Top, bands playing, could not hear. The whole thing was just a disaster. Like she's trying to sing, bands, it was a disaster. It was just an absolute embarrassment. Garrison Tucker says, will we take some calls on Friday? You never know. It's not a bad. Yeah. So here it is from 2023. Cool scene. We actually got a chance to see Dolly up close and personal. I mean, you talk about, she's got to be getting close to 90 years old. Looks great. That's amazing. That's a superhuman level of perpetual youth that she's maintained. Cool to see Peyton walking her out. But then after that, it was just a disaster. Just a disaster. She's trying to sing. The band's playing like a runaway train. She can't hear herself. Band can't hear her. Like they're supposed to be musicians. I don't blame Dolly for this. I'm talking about the Pride of the South thing. They're supposed to be musicians. How do they not know that wasn't going to be a total disaster? Really, the great legacy of Dolly Parton was tarnished that day by Tennessee folks. They revere her, but somehow They were not great caretakers of her legacy on this particular day. They just weren't. All right. Savannah Bryan says, I'm nervous because we have played so poorly going into bye weeks the last few years. That is true, but I don't. So Brian's right to once again give you a gambling trend. The most pronounced gambling trend of all for Georgia, more so than they don't ever cover 40-point lines. The one that's even more pronounced than that is Georgia is horrendous against the spread going into a bye. Horrendous. I don't think that has any bearing on this game because I have a sneaking suspicion of knowing why it is that they're horrendous going into a bye, typically speaking. And this is one of the reasons why people think that Georgia doesn't play well against Kentucky. I think some of that may be true sometimes, but I think a lot of that's also because Kentucky has been the game going into a bye for whatever reason a lot. A lot of times late in the season. Last year was early into the season. Georgia just has a tendency to crawl its way across the finish line when they know they have an off week coming up. Injured players frequently don't play, whatever. But it's not usually big road test at Tennessee that Georgia plays the week before a bye. So Savannah Bryan's 100% right. This is a number we've talked about a lot over the years. Georgia is terrible going into a bye. Against the spread anyway. They're horrendous week before a bye. I don't have that as relevant for this week. I really don't. But we'll see.
Fact check, Dolly is 79.
Oh, she's only 79.
So she would have been 77 in that.
Okay. Why do I think she was way older than that? That's interesting. So good for her. I like Dolly Parton. I like her music. I've wanted to go to Dollywood for a long time. Never been. Savannah Bryan says the other one was Ole Miss at home before the second bye. Okay, so that's true. And you also have the LSU game in 2018 before the bye. That's pound for pound the worst, maybe the worst game in the Kirby Smart era, LSU in 2018. That was before a bye. All right, so Brian, maybe we'll at least mention it. Maybe we'll at least mention it on the show because it'd be weird not to. But I don't think it's relevant for Saturday, but it is a fact. It is a fact. And in the spirit of we report, you decide, maybe we should give that. It is a fact. Georgia is horrendous going into a bye. Even in the years in which they have two byes, they're typically horrendous going into those byes. All right. We got to go. SEM Dog says, speaking of counterintuitive, he thinks the gunner has more success because Tennessee won't be dropping 8 into coverage quite as much. That is a very sound piece of reasoning. And that is one of those counterintuitive truths that in college football is oftentimes true. That is well done. You could be right. All right, we have to go. YouTube one more time, and then we'll try to do more comments tomorrow. Field Mob has done a missile-oriented joke in the comment section a few times. I don't quite know what that is. I want to be careful about making any kind of humor around missiles being fired. Jack Fullerton asking about Chase Calicut. Yeah, I don't have anything new on that, but it's probably worth revisiting the Jeff Centellier at some point in time. Lou, critical of Dollywood. Yeah, your intelligence does not match mine on that. I've heard good things about Dollywood, and I also like flea markets. So maybe I'm the wrong one on that. But I grew up going to flea markets. I like a good flea market. But I've also heard good things about Dollywood. All right, let us get ready to go. Johnny Surf Dog says the Gators are in the gutter. That's always a good way to close it out. Fun stuff today. Thank you for being here. More comments tomorrow. More talk. Maybe Savannah's Brian's right. Maybe we should mention, at least point out to people that, boy, oh boy, Georgia has not been good going into a bye. Maybe we should at least mention that because the numbers are stark. A lot of it's against Kentucky, but it's not all against Kentucky. Worst of the worst is probably against LSU. So fair point. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning. By the way, Lou, this is a fair point. He says, if you want to talk good about Dollywood, you can do it next week, just not this week. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. We'll stay in character this week. That's a good point. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.